Hi dancers, it's Katerina. I'm here in my flat in London and I decided to record this little video for you because I'm in self-isolation like all of you at this moment. And when I was thinking about the topic, a lot of you reached out to me and asked about a video that would be about arms in Oriental dance. I thought that that's a topic that is actually perfect because you don't need that much space. And also it is a topic that so many dancers are struggling with. When I teach classes and when I teach workshops, usually dancers pick up the steps quite fast. They know how to move their hips, especially the more advanced dancers. But a lot of dancers complain that their arm movements aren't great, that they don't like looking at their videos because they don't like the arm movements. So in this video, I will try to address this problem. And first, I would like to address it more from a, let's say, methodical, theoretical point of view, and maybe make you think a little bit about what arm movements are in Oriental dance in order to put it all in perspective. And then I would like to record a second video where I would maybe show you some practical examples of how you can improve your arm movements. So to help with this video, I'm not just working with my experience and with what I've learned in the past 16, 17 years of being an Oriental dance professional, believe it or not. But I'm also using this book, which is a very interesting book by my good friend and mentor and an amazing personality, Raks. You probably know her, most of you. And she put together the fundamental movement vocabulary of Raks Sharky. And that's, I think, a massive undertaking because to put together a trustworthy book of basic movements of Oriental dance is pretty impossible. Most of you have been dancing for a while and you've seen a lot of videos out there. You know how varied all the different styles are, how many different movements are there, and how the dance is changing. And when you look at the old black and white videos and you look at videos that are 15 years old and you look at how dancers dance today, it's very clear that the dance is changing. But I think that Morocco in this book managed to put together a syllabus of basic movements that are just like a backbone of Middle Eastern dance vocabulary. So I think that's something that if you're interested in this topic, I can definitely recommend this book, even though talking about Oriental arms, I will use some of what she says there to maybe suggest also something else. I definitely would not disagree, but maybe add a little bit on top. And I'm sure that Morocco is not a person that would have a problem with people having dialogue with what she is saying in this book. So first of all, I would like to maybe talk a little bit about, when it comes to arms, how we can divide the meaning of arm movements in Oriental dance. A lot of people, when they started dancing 2 decades ago, they sort of tended to mix all different Asian styles of dancing, which of course today we know is a little bit inappropriate to just, jam it all together in one bag and, think that you can do Egyptian movements to Indian music and Indian arm movements to Egyptian music. There needs to be a difference there. These cultures need to be treated with respect. And that's why when we look at the way Oriental, I would say Middle Eastern, more precisely, people use their arms, there is a clear difference between how, for example, some of the Indian dances use their arms. Because a lot of the Egyptian and Middle Eastern arm movements are not narrative. They are there to express, and they are there to sort of aesthetically frame the dance. Of course, you can argue with me about that, and we can go more deeply into, these hypotheses. But when you look at how Middle Eastern people move their arms, mostly the way their arms is sort of the way I move my arms when I talk to you. I'm saying an information, and quite naturally I accompany it with an arm movement or with a hand movement. And that is sort of how arms work in Middle Eastern dance. I'm not using my arms in terms of these specific movements having translations into words, but they sort of accompany the tone and the energy of what I'm saying. And I think that's a good parallel with how you use arms in Middle Eastern dancing, because of course a lot of the music doesn't have any words, and then you have music that does have words, and that also plays quite a role, because usually with music that doesn't have any lyrics, that doesn't have any words, the arm movements tend to have a more aesthetic purpose. They are just supposed to be there to be pretty and to frame the dance and create a sort of pleasing line around your body. While when dancers, especially when Middle Eastern people of the culture, dance to songs that have words and that have meaning and that have a deep meaning to them, you can see their arms being very expressive. So when you look at these factors, you suddenly recognize that there are a lot of arm movements that would not fit a little box of what Middle Eastern arm movements in Middle Eastern dance look like. And also, again, then we have to make a difference between folkloric dances and classical dances and different types of local dances. It's, as Sarah Saida says, it's complicated. So when we look at the basic movements, sort of the basic vocabulary of movements, you have a sort of basic number of certain movements that would be Middle Eastern dance specific. When you look at Egyptian women that meet and dance, or people in clubs, how they move, they have a certain inherited, I would say, observed way of moving their arms that isn't learned in classes. As you know, when you go to Egyptian belly dance festivals, or the students are from outside of Egypt, it's just the teachers that are Egyptian, because Egyptian people don't have a formal way really to learn their dance. They learn maybe other dances, but belly dancing or Middle Eastern dancing or Raks, Sharky, whatever you call it, is not part of a formal dance education there. So the arm movements especially are something that people observe, and they learn it by watching. They don't learn it by incorporating it in a choreography. Again, you would have some exceptions like Mahmoud Reda, but let's stick to the basics. So you would have these inherited movements that people learn by watching, and that would be about, you know, where people put their arms, how they move them around their bodies in connection to certain music. And then you would have specific personalized movements. And some of these dancers and their personalized arm movements become so famous and so popular that people take it on, and it becomes sort of part of the wider arm vocabulary. Something like that you could say of Rana Kamal. Rana Kamal has a very specific way of moving her arms, but it became so popular that suddenly today even people who might not know who she is would use her arm vocabulary. So this is how a personal style sort of can influence dance as a whole, and there's no reason complaining about that. It's just the evolution of the dance. So some personal individual movements in case of famous dancers can become part of a wider vocabulary, but we can probably say that there is a group of basic movements that when you look back at the old videos are mainly coming from belly dancing, in my opinion, and a certain basic movement of arms that I think is well described in this book. This book sort of describes this main way of using the arms that people still use when they dance to belly music today. Of course, as the dance was changing throughout the years, and as other dance forms, especially ballet and jazz and contemporary dancing, started influencing this dance, the arms changed. So, for example, Rocky says here that the wrists and hands are always relaxed, never stiff in ballet positions. Well, we can argue that, right? Because we can't even say that that's the ideal case, because nowadays you have a lot of very popular, successful dancers who are making their living by performing this dance, and their background comes from ballroom, or their background comes from jazz, or their background comes from ballet, and their arm movements are certainly influenced by these dance styles. So if you would go to Egypt or to a Middle Eastern country and see the local people dance, it's very unlikely that their arms would be naturally ballet-like, yeah, unless they watch a lot of YouTube videos, which nowadays happens as well. So the local people, without any external influence, would not have ballet arms. But again, it makes a huge difference if we are talking about professionals or we are talking about local people. And most of us dancers who study Oriental dance, we definitely come more in contact with other professionals and not local people as much. So of course our perspective is influenced by this contact. So the way dancers usually learn arms is in choreographies. They learn arms through watching videos and through practice. So that fundamentally already is very different from how Middle Eastern people learn arm movements, which is by observing. Yeah? It's a basic control of muscles in your back and in your arms, and then the rest is just slow observation and very slow evolution of a natural expression of arm movements. When you approach studying arms and arm movements in dance from the perspective of drilling choreographies and drilling combinations, your arms are going to be completely different. And I don't even think that you're just going to have great arms because you've been practicing a lot. It's not really how it works. And my experiences, especially when I travel to Asian countries where people approach Middle Eastern dance with a lot of dedication and a lot of drilling and a lot of hours in the dance studio and not necessarily as much watching, you can see that their arm movements become mechanical, and especially when they try to approach folkloric dances or more popular dances with this approach, the arm movements sort of turn into a little bit of sign language. It looks very it doesn't look like a natural arm movement. It looks very rehearsed, and it kind of goes against against how arms in Oriental dance are supposed to look like, because in my opinion, facial expressions and arm movements is the most individual and the most expressive part of the dance. When you look at body movements and steps, and that's something I tell people in my workshops a lot, body movements and steps can be copied. And when you copy somebody's steps and somebody's hip movements, it's not so much of a problem, because there is not as much personal flair to it. I mean, there is some to a certain degree, but definitely not as much as there is to facial expressions and arm movements. If you start to copy somebody's arm movements and if you start to emulate somebody's facial expressions, you sort of lose yourself a little bit, in my opinion. So when it comes to facial expressions, when it comes to arm movements, I think there needs to be a lot of patience, a lot of slow evolution. It's just not something that you can make happen in a 2-hour workshop, in my opinion. When we look back at the old videos, the black and white videos, we can argue that the arm movements in those videos, in the old movies, are more simple than what you can see today. I think that's something that's pretty fair to say, and it's probably because those dancers really only move their arms naturally. There was no rehearsing. I mean, they dance choreographies, as we know. A lot of those dancers in those movies dance choreographies, but I don't think there was a sort of pressure to overcomplicate arm movements. Again, they used the arm movements more from the natural bellady way of moving arms, and also more as like a gentle frame to the dance, and maybe also sometimes to make some sort of contact, which of course is another way we use arms. Like when I talk to you and I reach my hand out, it makes you connect to me, and that's another way how dancers use their arms, you know, to turn away, to create a barrier, to connect. So of course we can see that in the old movies as well, but today when you see dancers, how they move arms, it's way more expressive. It has gotten sometimes borderline aggressive, which I'm not saying as a negative thing, I'm just saying it as an observation. But we also have to consider the fact that the dancers we only know from the black and white movies or from the old videos from the films, those were dancers that were creating a choreography for a movie. We don't know exactly how those dancers danced in the clubs. There aren't that many videos of that. So the dancers we experience today, we very often have a first-hand experience. So that might also cause us having a stronger impression from their face and from their arms. So when you look at the basic range of movements and what Rocky is talking about in this book, I'm just gonna show you a little bit from it. I don't want you to show you too much because it's a good book and I recommend you to get it. There are little pictures like that that would show some of the basic arm positions. And really when you look at those really are the classical positions that you will see throughout all Middle East, classical dance, folklore. It's just the classic lines that we use in Oriental dance. So if you sort of go into those and practice those little positions, you can't really go wrong because those will be definitely useful. But of course there is a lot on top. These basic positions would be the positions that all Middle Eastern people who care to dance, because not all care to dance, but those who want to dance and those who learn by observations and through inheriting certain movement patterns and listening to music, they would probably do these movements that are in the book and that I will show you later in the practical exercise, because those are very easy movements. The arm movement, that's something important to say, the arm movements in Middle Eastern dance, they are mainly not complicated. They are not meant to be complicated because they are meant to be able to be picked up by everyone. You know, sort of everybody is able to do these movements. There is nothing super complex about those. And then the little details, the little complexities are something that every person sort of puts on top of as their own little personal stamp. But the basic range, I would say, is pretty simple. And I think that a lot of dancers are struggling with arm movements just because they are approaching this problem and this topic from a very complicated way of looking at it. And I think some teachers are also not really helping to make it easier, because even when I was learning arm movements in the beginning of my dancing, arms would be in different places with different movements. The transitions didn't make any sense to me. So when you approach this topic from a very basic way, how to move the arms from the center, how to think about the transitions in connection to breath, and how to accompany different movements with different hip movements and body movements with different arm movements, then it all starts to make a lot more sense. And also it brings a little bit more freedom into your dance, because there really is no rule that when you're doing something with the right hip, your left arm must be up. It might be so in some group choreographies or when you go to a Reda workshop, because of course those are group choreographies. In group choreographies you have to be very precise, but we have to understand that most of Oriental dancing is very individualistic. One person is dancing and one person can pretty much do whatever they want, as long as they understand the history and as long as they understand the cultural connections and the music. And that's the difficult part. The arm movements by themselves aren't the complicated part. The complicated part is to understand what's appropriate, why this thing is supposed to be simple as opposed to complicated, or why something is right and something else is wrong. So that's something that I will address in the next video. If you would have any questions, feel free to message me. I'm happy to help. We are all sort of stuck in this unfortunate situation, so I really hope that you all are taking care of yourselves. Stay at home, stay safe, and happy dancing.